The sheer weight of the antique lace veil felt suffocating, pressing down on me as I stared at my reflection in the bridal suite mirror. 5 days. In just 5 days, I was supposed to be gliding down the aisle of the imposing saint, James Cathedral radiating joy, towards Daniel Peterson, the man I loved, the man I'd meticulously planned this elaborate, breathtakingly expensive wedding with for the past 14 months. But the reflection staring back wasn't a blushing bride. It was a woman hollowed out by a chilling, creeping dread, her eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and a confusion rapidly curdling into icy fear. Because Daniel, my brilliant, ambitious, soon-to-be husband, had effectively vanished. Not physically, not entirely, but emotionally, he was gone. Replaced by a distracted, irritable stranger who communicated primarily through curt text messages blaming a high-stakes deal and the crushing demands of his infamous, rarely seen boss, a man whose name was invoked like a mythical deity, the chairman. My name is Sophia Bellwether. I'm 34 years old, a marketing director at a successful Chicago lifestyle brand. A woman accustomed to managing complex campaigns, juggling deadlines, and keeping things under control. But the final week before my wedding was spiraling rapidly, terrifyingly out of my control. The man I was about to pledge my life to was treating me like an inconvenient afterthought, a line item easily deferred. And the excuse he kept using, this all-consuming crisis involving the chairman, felt increasingly wrong. Little did I know just how wrong or how intimately connected that mythical chairman was to the devastating drama about to unfold at the altar. Little did Daniel know. Our story, until this final nightmarish week, had felt like a modern fairy tale. We met 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser. He, the devastatingly handsome, fast-rising vice president at a prestigious investment bank, Harding & Croft. Me, the driven marketing professional. The connection was instant, electric. Dan was ambitious, yes, fiercely so, but also charming, attentive, initially, at least, and seemingly adored me. He pursued me relentlessly, showering me with flowers, whisking me away on romantic weekend trips, painting a vivid picture of a future partnership built on mutual success and support. The engagement 14 months ago was spectacular. A surprise proposal during a trip to Italy, overlooking the Arno in Florence, complete with a stunning ring he claimed took months to design. I was swept off my feet, deliriously happy. We set the date, booked the Grand Saint, James Cathedral, and the opulent ballroom at the Drake Hotel for the reception. Planning the wedding became my second job, a meticulous campaign executed with the same strategic focus I applied to my marketing work. I wanted perfection, not just for me, but for us, a celebration worthy of the incredible future I believed we were building. Dan's job at Harding & Croft was always demanding. Long hours, high pressure, constant travel. It was the nature of the investment banking beast. I understood that, respected his drive. His ambition was part of what initially attracted me. He often spoke, with a mixture of awe and trepidation, about the firm's senior leadership, particularly the legendary figurehead, the chairman of the board, a man rarely seen publicly, but whose influence was immense, whose approval could make or break careers. Dan was desperate to impress him, especially now with a major promotion and a potentially life-altering bonus riding on the success of a massive, complex merger deal he was currently leading. He called it the Keystone Project. My father, Arthur Bellwether, had always been my quiet rock. A successful businessman himself, now semi-retired and involved mostly in private investments and board memberships, the specifics of which he rarely discussed, preferring quiet philanthropy. He adored me but maintained a certain old-school reserve. He liked Dan well enough, or so I thought, though he'd occasionally make dry comments about the rat race of investment banking or ask pointed questions about work-life balance that Dan would deftly deflect. Dad was grounded, principled, valuing integrity and hard work over flashy success. qualities I sometimes worried Dan in his relentless climb occasionally overlooked. Dad wasn't overly involved in the wedding planning, offering financial support generously, but leaving the details to me, trusting my judgment. He lived out of state, visiting occasionally, always a source of calm wisdom, though he seemed slightly bemused by the scale and expense of the wedding I was orchestrating. He didn't quite grasp the pressures of Dan's world, or so I believed. The first real sign that something was seriously amiss began about 10 days before the wedding. Dan became distant. Not just busy, but emotionally unavailable. His usual affectionate texts dwindled, replaced by short, perfunctory replies. Phone calls were rushed, often cut short with abrupt claims of needing to jump on a call with the team or prep for the chairman's review. He started coming home to the downtown condo we shared later and later, often after I was already asleep, leaving again before dawn. When he was physically present, his mind was clearly elsewhere, his eyes glued to his phone or laptop, his jaw perpetually clenched. He became irritable, snapping at me over minor things. The caterer needing a final head count, the florist confirming delivery times. "Soph, can this wait?" He'd sigh, running a hand distractedly through his already messy hair. "I'm drowning here. The Keystone deal is hitting critical snags. The chairman is breathing down my neck every 5 minutes. I literally cannot think about napkin colors right now." Initially, I tried to be the supportive fiancé. I brought him late-night coffee, tried to give him space, reminded myself this pressure was temporary, tied to this one massive deal. The wedding was just days away. Surely he could compartmentalize, delegate, find some balance. But the excuses piled up, always invoking the almost mythical pressure from the top. "Sorry, canceled dinner. Unexpected conference call with the chairman's office. Can't make the tasting reschedule. Have to rework the entire presentation for the chairman by morning." No, didn't call the officiant back yet. Dealing with a regulatory fire drill triggered by the chairman's inquiry. The chairman, this unseen force, became the convenient scapegoat for every instance of neglect, every broken promise, every moment Dan failed to show up for me, for us during the most important week of our lives leading up to our wedding day. My unease began to curdle into something sharper, colder. Was it really just work stress? Or was something else going on? Was he getting cold feet? Was there someone else? The thought felt like a betrayal even to consider, but his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, almost secretive. Then came the overheard phone call 4 days before the wedding. I was supposedly asleep, but his hushed, frantic tones from the living room pulled me into a state of hyper-alertness. I couldn't hear the other side, but Dan's words were fragments of pure panic. "No, the due diligence figures don't align. Look, we just need to make the synergy projections look stronger before the final review. Can we massage the comps? Absolutely cannot let him see the raw data yet." It was a calculation error, a stupid mistake. If the chairman finds out before we close, the whole deal craters, and I'm finished. Just find a way to bridge the gap, damn it. It wasn't the sound of a confident executive navigating a tough negotiation. It was the sound of someone desperately trying to cover up a significant screw-up, potentially involving fudged numbers or misleading projections, right before a final presentation to the all-powerful chairman. My blood ran cold. Was this the real reason for his stress, his secrecy, his neglect? Was he not just working hard, but actively engaged in some sort of professional deception, terrified of being exposed, and using me, the wedding, as collateral damage in his desperate scramble? The very next day, 3 days before we were supposed to say "I do," the bottom truly fell out. It was the day of our final meeting with the wedding coordinator at the hotel, followed by the church rehearsal. Dan was supposed to meet me at the hotel at 4 p.m. At 4:15, I got a text. "Running late. Chairman called emergency session RE Keystone." At 5 o'clock, another. Still stuck. This is brutal. Might have to skip coordinator meeting. at 5:45, just 15 minutes before the church rehearsal was scheduled to begin across town. So sorry, Soph. Cannot break away. This is critical path for the deal. Chairman is demanding answers now. Unavoidable. Go ahead when rehearsal. Will try my absolute best to make dinner later. Please understand. Understand? I stood there in the hotel lobby, clutching my phone, reading his curt, dismissive message, while my wedding coordinator looked on with pitying eyes. Humiliation washed over me, hot and stinging. He wasn't even trying anymore. He was blatantly choosing this deal, this chairman, over standing beside me at our own wedding rehearsal. Somehow, I got through it. I numbly directed the coordinator on the final details we were supposed to decide together. I drove to the beautiful, imposing St. James Cathedral, where our families, his parents looking awkwardly apologetic, mine looking concerned, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen, minus the groom, were all assembled, waiting. I had to stand at the altar beside the best man, awkwardly walking through the motions, explaining Dan's absence with forced brightness. He's so swamped with a crucial deal, poor thing, sends his deepest apologies. While feeling like a complete and utter fool, my maid of honor, Emily, held my hand tightly afterwards, her eyes blazing. "This is beyond unacceptable, Sophia," she whispered fiercely. "This isn't just work stress. This is him showing you exactly where you rank, which is apparently somewhere below a PowerPoint presentation." At the rehearsal dinner afterwards, held at a chic downtown restaurant, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Dan finally showed up nearly 2 hours late, looking pale, exhausted, and hunted. He offered a mumbled, generic apology about the deal from hell, pecked my cheek distractedly, then spent the rest of the evening glued to his phone, occasionally stepping outside for hushed, stressed conversations. He barely spoke to our families, offered no explanation to the wedding party, and seemed completely oblivious to the monumental disrespect he had shown me, shown everyone. He was physically present, but utterly absent. That night, back alone in the luxurious hotel suite I'd booked for my final nights as a single woman, I couldn't bear the thought of going back to our shared condo, filled with his stressful energy. The dam finally broke. The hurt, the humiliation, the anger, the dawning certainty that he wasn't just stressed, but likely deeply dishonest, it all coalesced into a single terrifying thought. I cannot marry this man tomorrow. But what was the alternative? Calling off the wedding hours before it began? Facing the hundreds of guests, the wasted expense, the public shame, the pitying looks? Letting him be the one who seemingly got cold feet or prioritized work while I looked like the jilted bride? Number absolutely not. He wouldn't get off that easily. He wouldn't be allowed to control this narrative too. Fueled by a potent cocktail of heartbreak, fury, adrenaline, and perhaps Emily's earlier righteous indignation echoing in my ears, I did something impulsive, something potentially crazy, something utterly out of character for the usually meticulous, controlled Sophia Bellwether. I needed confirmation. I needed leverage. I needed to understand if the chairman excuse held even a shred of truth. My mind flashed back to an old company networking event brochure Dan had left lying around months ago, the one listing the firm's senior partners and board members. I scrambled through my purse, found the crumpled brochure tucked in a side pocket, Harding and Croft, board of directors, and there it was, the chairman's name. Not just a title, but a name I knew intimately, though I rarely used his formal title in my head, Arthur Bellwether. My father. The pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. My father, the quiet investor, the semi-retired businessman, was the chairman of the board at Harding and Croft, the mythical figure Dan both revered and feared, the man whose name he'd been using as an excuse for neglecting me. Did Dan know Arthur Bellwether was my father? He knew my father's name, of course, had met him several times at family events, but Dad was always introduced simply as my father, Arthur. Never with his corporate title. Dad was notoriously private about his business affiliations, especially in social settings. It was entirely possible, even probable, given Dan's self-absorption and Dad's discretion, that Dan had never made the connection. He feared the chairman, but saw my father as just my unassuming dad. The irony was staggering, the potential power shift electrifying. My hands shaking, not with fear anymore, but with a strange, terrifying sense of purpose. I picked up my phone. I didn't call information, didn't search online. I dialed the private number I knew by heart, the one that bypassed assistance and went straight through. My father answered on the second ring, his voice calm and familiar, though it was well past midnight his time. "Sophia, is everything all right, sweetheart? It's late." Tears choked my voice as the story poured out. The neglect, the constant chairman excuses, the missed rehearsal, the overheard phone call hinting at deception, my fear, my humiliation, my certainty that I couldn't go through with the wedding. I didn't accuse Dan outright of fraud, just relayed what I'd heard, what I suspected. I didn't ask Dad to intervene, didn't even reveal my sudden realization about his position at Harding and Croft. I just needed to tell him, needed his wisdom, his support. There was a long pause on the other end of the line after I finished, a silence so profound I wondered if the call had dropped. Then my father spoke, his voice quieter than usual but with an undercurrent of glacial fury that I had never heard directed at anyone before. "Sophia," he said slowly, precisely, "I am so sorry you've been put through this. No daughter of mine deserves to be treated with such profound disrespect, especially not at a time like this." He paused again, then continued, his voice hardening. "You are right to have concerns about Daniel's work crisis. I happen to be peripherally aware of the keystone project he's managing. There have been significant irregularities, serious questions raised about his competence, his transparency, and frankly, his integrity in handling the data presented to the board. He is indeed under immense pressure, but largely, it appears, pressure stemming from his own poor decisions and attempts to conceal them. He still didn't explicitly reveal his role, framing it as outside knowledge, maintaining the separation for now, but his words confirmed my deepest fears about Dan's dishonesty. "He keeps blaming the pressure from the top, Dad," I whispered, wiping away tears. "Blaming the chairman." Another pause, pregnant with unspoken meaning. Then Dad said very deliberately, "That's interesting. Because the chairman, I assure you, values integrity and personal responsibility above all else. Perhaps Daniel needs a very clear, very public demonstration of what happens when those values are misplaced. When a man prioritizes covering his professional failures over honoring his personal commitments." He let the implication hang in the air. My breath hitched. Was he suggesting? The audacious idea that had flickered earlier, the one involving the boss, suddenly slammed back into focus, but now with a terrifying, concrete possibility. "Dad," I started, unsure how to phrase it. "Sophia," he interrupted gently but firmly, "tomorrow morning you will get ready. You will put on that beautiful dress. You will go to the cathedral. But you will not walk down that aisle alone, nor will you stand beside a man who has treated you this way. But who—" "I will be there, sweetheart," he said, his voice now filled with quiet, unwavering authority. "I will fly in overnight. I will meet you in the bridal room, and I will escort you down that aisle. Let Daniel, let everyone, see who stands beside you." The sheer audacity of it, the reversal of power, the potential for public detonation. It was terrifying. But it was also undeniably, incredibly empowering. A way to reclaim my dignity, expose Dan's lies, and deliver a consequence so fitting, so devastating, it felt like divine, or at least paternal, intervention. "Okay, Dad," I whispered, a strange sense of calm washing over me amidst the emotional wreckage. "Okay." The wedding morning dawned surprisingly bright and clear after the overnight snow flurries. Inside the luxurious bridal suite at the Drake, the atmosphere was thick with a strange mixture of frantic energy and hushed conspiracy. Emily, my maid of honor, now fully briefed on the revised plan, was a whirlwind of efficiency and fierce loyalty, coordinating makeup artists and hairdressers while fielding anxious texts from bridesmaids, unaware of the impending drama. My mother, informed by my father earlier that morning about the change, though likely not the full reasoning behind his specific intervention, looked pale but resolute. Her initial shock replaced by a protective maternal instinct I hadn't seen in years. As I sat getting my hair pinned up, catching my reflection in the mirror, I saw not the tearful, heartbroken woman from the night before, but someone different, someone with shadows still under her eyes. Yes, but with a new, steely glint in her gaze. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing ache, but it was overlaid now with a chilling sense of purpose. I was no longer just reacting. I was acting. My father arrived as promised, looking impeccably dressed in his formal morning suit, radiating an aura of quiet authority that seemed to fill the room. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "You are doing the right thing, Sophia. Stay strong." There was no hint in his demeanor of the corporate titan Dan feared, only the protective father. But I knew better now. The limousine ride to St. James Cathedral felt dreamlike. Emily squeezed my hand. Dad sat opposite me, his expression calm, almost serene. Arriving at the massive stone church, seeing the waiting guests milling outside, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. This was happening. Inside the vestibule, hidden from view, we waited as the organ music swelled. The wedding coordinator, bless her professional heart, looked utterly baffled by the last-minute change in escort, but asked no questions. The bridesmaids lined up, casting confused glances back at me and my father. Emily gave me a final, fierce nod of encouragement. Then, the familiar, majestic strains of Wagner's bridal chorus began. The massive oak doors at the back of the cathedral swung open. The congregation rose, turning expectantly, and we began to walk. My father's arm was steady beneath mine. I kept my gaze focused straight ahead, down the impossibly long aisle towards the altar where Daniel Peterson stood waiting, flanked by his groomsmen. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on us, could sense the ripple of confusion spreading through the pews like wildfire. Who is that walking her down? Isn't that... It looks like Arthur Bellwether. What is he doing here, escorting the bride? But my focus was lasered onto Dan. I watched his face as recognition dawned, as the pieces clicked into place in his panicked brain. The initial look of relief at seeing me actually appear shifted instantly to one of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. Then came confusion, rapidly morphing into sheer, unadulterated horror. His face drained of all color, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He visibly recoiled, taking an involuntary step backward, his eyes wide with terror. He wasn't just seeing his future father-in-law anymore. He was seeing the chairman, the man he feared, the man he had likely lied to, whose trust he had potentially betrayed professionally. And that man was now standing beside the woman Dan had treated like disposable refuse all week. The collision of his two worlds, personal and professional, was happening right here, right now, in the most public, most devastating way imaginable. The walk down the aisle felt both instantaneous and eternal. The majestic organ music seemed to mock the silent, screaming tension in the air. My father escorted me with calm, quiet dignity, his presence a solid anchor in the storm. I held my head high, my steps measured, my expression deliberately neutral, though my heart felt like it might beat its way out of my chest. We reached the front. My father paused. He didn't place my hand in Dan's non-existent grasp. He simply gave my hand a slight squeeze, met my eyes with a look of profound love and approval, then stepped back slightly, positioning himself not just as the father of the bride, but as a silent, powerful witness. The officiant, a kindly elderly Monsignor who looked utterly bewildered by the unexpected escort, cleared his throat, preparing to begin the traditional opening words. Dan stood frozen, seemingly incapable of speech or movement, his eyes darting frantically between me and my father. He looked trapped, cornered, utterly undone. Before the Monsignor could utter the first, "Dearly beloved," I took a small, deliberate step forward. My voice, when I spoke, didn't tremble. Amplified slightly by the cathedral's natural acoustics and the absolute stunned silence of the congregation, it rang out clear and firm. I turned slightly, addressing the assembled guests first. Thank you all for being here today, for sharing in what was meant to be a joyous occasion. My gaze then locked onto Daniel, pinning him in place. Daniel, I began, keeping my tone level, devoid of hysteria, letting the weight of the words land fully. I came here today, to this beautiful place, fully prepared to marry you, fully prepared to commit my life, my love, my future, to building a partnership with you based on what I believed was mutual love, trust, and respect. I paused, letting the silence stretch. But the man I fell in love with, the partner I agreed to marry, seemed to vanish sometime last week. He was replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who prioritized spreadsheets over vows, frantic conference calls over genuine commitment, someone who chose to hide behind endless excuses rather than face his responsibilities. Responsibilities to me, to our relationship, to the commitment we were supposed to make today. And as I have only recently come to fully understand, I added, letting my eyes flicker towards my father, then back to Dan's horrified face, perhaps responsibilities to his professional integrity as well. I took another breath. For days, Daniel, you told me repeatedly, emphatically, that you couldn't be present for me, couldn't participate in the preparations for our wedding, couldn't even stand beside me at our rehearsal, because of the urgent, unavoidable, all-consuming demands of your boss at Harding and Croft. The pressure, you said, was immense, coming directly from the top, from the chairman. My voice dropped slightly, becoming almost conversational, yet carrying deadly precision. It seems only fitting then, perhaps even poetically just, that the man standing beside me today, the man who graciously escorted me down this aisle when my own fiancé failed to show up for me in any meaningful way this week, is indeed that very chairman. I paused to let the revelation land fully, watching the color drain completely from Dan's face, seeing the dawning comprehension and horror ripple through the guests who understood the implication. My father, Arthur Bellwether. The collective gasp in the cathedral was audible. Dan looked like he might actually faint. I turned my attention fully back to him, my voice regaining its firmness. Therefore, Daniel, there will be no wedding today, because the foundation required for marriage, trust, respect, honesty, partnership, has been demonstrably, irrevocably shattered by your actions and your choices this past week. I deserve better than excuses and neglect. And frankly, I concluded, my voice ringing with finality in the cavernous space, the sanctity of these vows, this commitment, deserves better than to be built upon such a compromised and dishonest foundation. With that, I turned away from him, away from the altar, away from the life I thought I wanted. The silence held for another beat, then erupted into a cacophony of shocked whispers, murmurs, and maybe even a few stifled gasps. Dan stood frozen, a statue of public humiliation. My father stepped forward, offered me his arm again, his eyes filled with fierce pride. And together, father and daughter, chairman and wronged woman, we turned and walked calmly, deliberately, back up the aisle, leaving the wreckage of Daniel Peterson's ambition and arrogance scattered behind us at the altar of St. James Cathedral. The exit from the cathedral felt like parting the Red Sea. Guests scrambled out of our way, faces a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. The organist, perhaps sensing the abrupt end, had mercifully stopped playing. Outside, in the bright, cold January air, the surreal normalcy of Chicago traffic buzzing past felt jarring. My father guided me swiftly towards a waiting black car, not the wedding limo, I noted numbly, shielding me from the bewildered stares and nascent questions. Emily and my parents quickly followed, bundling me inside. As the car pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of Dan emerging from the church doors, looking utterly lost and alone, his best man trying awkwardly to steer him away, his parents rushing towards him with expressions of horror. The hours that followed were a logistical and emotional whirlwind. Back at the hotel, fueled by adrenaline and Emily's fierce efficiency, we began the grim task of dismantling a wedding that never happened. Calls were made to the reception venue, the Drake, thankfully understanding, though the deposit was non-refundable, the caterer, the band, the florist, informing them the event was canceled. A brief, carefully worded email was drafted and sent out to the entire guest list via the wedding website, apologizing for the sudden cancellation due to unforeseen personal circumstances and requesting privacy. The sheer financial waste was staggering. But at that moment, it felt insignificant compared to the alternative, marrying a man who had shown such profound disrespect and dishonesty. My father handled things with quiet authority. He made a few brief, discreet phone calls from the hotel suite. I didn't ask who he was calling or what was said. I didn't need to. I knew the gears of consequence were turning. He stayed with me, offering silent support until I insisted I just needed to rest, to process. Before leaving for the airport to catch his private jet back, he simply hugged me and said, "You were magnificent, Sophia. Incredibly strong. He didn't deserve you. Remember that." The professional fallout for Dan was, as expected, swift and brutal. News of the dramatic events at the cathedral, particularly the identity of the bride's escort, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit Chicago financial community, being publicly revealed as not only a neglectful, potentially dishonest fiancé, but also having profoundly misjudged, or been ignorant of, his relationship with the chairman of the board. It was career immolation. Within a week, Harding and Croft announced Daniel Peterson's departure to pursue other opportunities, the standard corporate euphemism for being unceremoniously fired. His reputation was in tatters. Landing another high-level position in investment banking after such a public, character-damaging flameout would be next to impossible. My own healing process was slower, more complex. There was relief, immense relief, at having dodged a bullet, at having escaped a marriage that would have surely been built on a foundation of lies and neglect. There was anger, still simmering beneath the surface, at his callousness, his betrayal, and there was grief. Not for Dan himself, not anymore, but for the future I thought I was building, for the dream of partnership that had dissolved so spectacularly. I moved out of the condo we shared, retrieving my belongings with the help of movers, while Dan was conveniently absent. I threw myself back into my marketing work, finding solace in its familiar challenges and tangible results. My friends rallied around me, providing unwavering support and much-needed distraction. I had one final, brief interaction with Dan. About a month after the non-wedding, he left a long, rambling voicemail on my phone, which I hadn't blocked, mostly out of morbid curiosity. It was a pathetic mix of self-pity, blame, and desperate justifications. He blamed the Keystone deal pressure, blamed the unrealistic demands of the unnamed chairman, blamed me for overreacting and humiliating him, claimed he still loved me and we could work through this if I just gave him another chance. Listening to it only solidified the absolute rightness of my decision. He still didn't get it. He still didn't take responsibility. I deleted the message without a reply. My relationship with my father entered a new phase, marked by a deeper understanding and unspoken respect. We never explicitly discussed his role as chairman in relation to Dan's firing, nor the precise details of Dan's professional failings. We didn't need to. He had shown me, through action rather than words, the depth of his love and protection, and I had shown him, perhaps, a strength he hadn't fully realized I possessed. Standing here today, a year later, looking back at that tumultuous week, the emotions are less raw, more reflective. Walking away from that altar wasn't an act of impulsive revenge. It was a calculated act of self-preservation, a refusal to be diminished, ignored, or betrayed any longer. Walking down that aisle flanked not by the man who took me for granted, but by the quiet power of my father, the very authority Dan had used as his shield. That was a moment of reclaiming my narrative, of turning his excuse into his public downfall. It was terrifying, yes. It was undeniably dramatic, but it was also, in the end, profoundly liberating. He made his priorities brutally clear in the days leading up to our wedding. I simply chose to make mine: self-respect, honesty, and the refusal to settle for anything less. Just as clear, right there at the altar. Some might still call it brutal. I simply call it balancing the scales. Now, life feels calmer, clearer. My career is thriving. I'm tentatively exploring the dating scene again, armed with hard-won wisdom and firmer boundaries, but echoes remain. Emily, my ever-loyal friend, sometimes jokes over drinks. You know, Soph, maybe you should have at least sent Julian Croft a thank-you note for the perfect assist. I always laugh it off, but the question lingers sometimes. His intervention was decisive, effective, perfectly timed, but was it purely paternal protection? Or was I, in some small way, also a convenient pawn in his own corporate chess game, a means to swiftly and definitively remove a flawed employee he already distrusted? Does his motivation ultimately change the outcome or the rightness of my decision? Does it matter why the chairman helped? Yes, his motives matter. If Croft primarily used Sophia's personal pain for his own corporate agenda, getting rid of a problematic employee, it slightly taints the justice served. It suggests a ruthlessness that Sophia should be aware of, even if the outcome benefited her. Understanding his full motivation is important for closure. No, his motives don't ultimately matter. Regardless of whether his primary driver was paternal love, corporate strategy, or a combination of both, his actions provided Sophia with the unexpected leverage she needed to escape a toxic situation, with her dignity intact, and ensure Dan faced real consequences. The outcome was just, and her empowerment was real, irrespective of his complex motivations.